Hi, Allegra here for my second video, longer video on homeschooling. I put up my blog post, I guess about a week ago now, and I've gotten some feedback, questions people had that I wanted to do another video. Also, some of the resources that I had shown on the post, some physical resources like a calendar and a worksheet, I'm gonna work through them here. The one thing I'm not gonna talk about here is how to homeschool long term, if that's something that you decide to do, because there are infinite numbers of ways to homeschool. And so I will do that in a separate video if there's desire for that, because maybe people are interested now that you've been experiencing it. I do want to say one thing though. I feel like homeschool has gotten a bad rap because of people who are using homeschooling as a way to legally ensure that their children are not being monitored or seen by the public world. You know, we've all read stories about these families in the news. It's very sensational. However, not everyone homeschools the way they homeschool. The way they homeschool is by setting up their own private school that is completely self-sufficient and unmonitored. The way I homeschool, and the way most of the families I know homeschool, is I homeschool through a public school. And because of that, I actually have a credentialed teacher who meets with me and my child in person every 3 weeks, talks to my child, sees examples. We do testing. So there's lots of different ways to homeschool. So I just want to get that out there, just in case you're homeschooling for longer than you think, and just in case you're interested in maybe homeschooling beyond. So that's my little caveat on that. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm basically just going to go point by point through my blog post. Because my blog post was pretty long, and everything I talked about I did not talk about in the first video. And I know some people it's easier to watch a video than to read a blog post, so that's why I'm doing this. And I also want to let you know that later today I'm planning on doing a podcast with someone who had some questions, a friend of mine. And so we will talk about the things, and maybe some questions will come up, because also sometimes it's just easier to listen to a podcast a few times, say while you're doing other chores like putting laundry away or cooking, and that way the information gets into your head a second time. When I do public speaking workshops, I tell people all the time that you are getting only about 10 to 20% of the information that you are hearing, seeing, reading at a time, right? So whatever I say right now, whatever you hear, you're gonna take about 20% away. Maybe you'll take a little bit more away if you're actually writing notes. So you're probably gonna have to listen or read or watch something multiple times to get all of the information. So I just wanna put that out there. That's why I'm doing it as a video and as a podcast. Okay, so let me go, I'm gonna just grab the blog because it's pretty long, I can't remember it all, and I will go through it point by point. Okay, so first of all, there are as many ways to homeschool as there are homeschoolers. And let's think of it as a spectrum. And the spectrum runs from unschooling, which has no set curriculum, has no set schedule. A lot of parents who homeschool this way, they really just follow the children's interests. And then the other side of the spectrum is basically schooling at home, which is what it sounds like. It's having a curriculum, having textbooks, having a schedule. I would say I'm somewhere smack in the middle. As I mentioned, we do testing. I do have a couple of textbooks and workbooks. However, if something special is happening, for instance, a solar eclipse or the International Space Station passing overhead or hail falls from the sky, if there's something that my child is curious about and asks me about, we will take that information and run with it. Okay, so you have to figure out where you are on this spectrum. Maybe you are working with a school already and so you're following their curriculum. So you're really doing schooling at home, but I just want to give you a sense of what that spectrum looks like. We do have a schedule, but we have a flexible schedule, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. I do want to point out though that my child is almost 10, so a lot of my information is for 10 and younger. I do have resources that go up to older ages, online resources that, you know, provide education for all levels of education. However, if you want more philosophical interest, more philosophical information, what I would say is go to the blog post. I have a link there to a book that was written by a friend of mine who is someone that I really look up to. I love everything that she does and says, and she has 3 adult children. She homeschooled all of them, so she will probably have more philosophy and that sort of thing about older children. Okay, so schedule. One of the reasons I chose to homeschool was because I had read a book called Nurture Shock. It's a great book. I should put that on the post. I'd read a book called Nurture Shock. I think it was in Nurture Shock. Maybe I'm wrong. Nurture Shock definitely had one thing that made me decide to homeschool, but I'll get to that later. The first thing was about the studies regarding brain science, the time that school starts at, and children's IQ level. And there's just a lot of science out there around the fact that children's brains are still developing, and they develop while they're asleep, and that if you wake them up earlier than they're ready to get up, that can impact their brain development. So we actually start, my daughter usually gets up around 8 a.m. She has 2 hours that are free, and then we start school at 10. And my goal, and my child knows this, is that we do work 4 out of 5 days a week. When COVID is not happening, we usually try and hold Friday for field trips, for going outside or doing play dates and that sort of thing, educational play dates. However, I also hold Friday because let's say my child is having a bad day on one of those Monday through Thursday days, then we make it up. And so 4 days of school a week, and the number of days my child has to do 4 days of school a week, it all ties into her chores and her stars that she earns for doing things around the house, which is a whole different video. But she knows that she has to do that. She's responsible for that. So our current schedule is, because a lot of people say, well, how am I going to get my work done if I have to homeschool my kids? So I want to let you know it is possible. One of the ways that it's possible is by getting up earlier. Okay, so I usually get up at 6 a.m. and I start doing stuff. And then by 8 a.m., if my child's not awake, then I wake her up. And she has free time. She knows that she has to entertain herself between 8 to 10. I always tell her my job is not to entertain you. And she will usually make her bed and make her own breakfast, which again is tied to her whole chore chart. Again, she's 10, but we've been doing this since she was about 8, the chore chart thing. So at 10 a.m., school starts. We do math and language arts every day. And we switch back and forth between science and social studies every other day. And we also do Spanish and typing every other day. Then at noon, we have a lunch break. And then around 1 or 1:30, school will start back up again. During this time, my child will also practice her piano, practice her singing, do art. We often exercise during this time. And the goal is to be done with schoolwork by 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. at the latest. If it happens at 4 p.m., it's usually because, like yesterday, we didn't finish till 4 p.m. because I was on the phone for an hour with our local utilities company trying to get something on an account fixed. And we lost an hour there. So usually we're done earlier. And by 4 p.m., I do have a cutoff point. I tell my child that if we're not done by 4 p.m., then the school day is over and she does not get credit for that school day. Maybe that's draconian, but it works for me. And then again, she has time to entertain herself. If she's given me really good cooperation and gotten her work done, she might earn a little bit of screen time on something called Brain Pop, which is an educational website that I highly recommend. Or maybe she's earned an opportunity to play some educational games. But those are the only types of screen time that she gets during the week. And then by 6, we make dinner. She often helps me with that. And then that's the end of the day. And I'll say that that is an ideal day. There are many times when we don't start schoolwork until 10:30. Be flexible, be gentle with yourself. The reality is, though, is because you're going to be able to teach your child the way your child likes to learn, you're going to go faster than a typical school day. It does not need to be 8 to 3 as every day. Okay, so an easy curriculum starter that I want to mention for people who have younger children, so let's say 3rd grade and under, is this philosophy called 5 in a row. Now, it is an actual curriculum. You can actually go to their website and buy it and buy the books they recommend. But I think the philosophy is really useful, and literally you could get started with 5 in a row today. And the concept is that you take a book and you read this exact same book every single day of the week. It's called 5 in a row because it's Monday through Friday, right? You could do 4 in a row. And then you pull out one aspect of it. So for instance, the example that I give is Harold and the Purple Crayon, because it's a book that a lot of us own. I wish I still had it. I think I donated already. But so you read Harold and the Purple Crayon the first day, and let's say the first day is math. And so you read the book and then you say to your kids, hey, let's pull out our crayons. How many purple crayons do we have? And you line them up. And the great thing about this is when a child is younger, for some of them, math is too abstract and they need to see physical objects. And so what I did with my child, because she's absolutely what's called a kinesthetic learner, she needs to see things, I would line up, let's say with the crayons, I would line up 2 purple crayons and 2 blue crayons. And I would say, oh, look, if the 2 purple crayons and 2 blue crayons come together, how many do we have? 4. Great. And then on a piece of paper or a whiteboard, I would write 2 plus 2 equals 4. And I would explain to her, these numbers are simply a mathematical way to represent what's going on in the real world. And she did not get addition and subtraction until I started doing that. Relaying the numbers, the equations to physical objects, blocks, crayons, apples, whatever we had around. So she understood. I was like, this is how you keep track of things. And then, she's making the connections in the brain. Math is not a concept that humans grasp naturally necessarily. I actually read a really interesting article the other day about cultures that have non-numerical languages, and people there cannot do math the way people who are raised with numbered languages and numbers can. So I just want to point that out. So that's a simple way to talk about math in the context of crayons. Maybe you count all of your crayons. Maybe you could also talk about color theory. I was just thinking you could do red crayons plus blue crayons equals purple crayons and talk about how the colors combine, right? So that would be day 1. And if you have a younger child too, you might only be doing 1 or 2 hours of school a day. For kids, under 3rd grade, the main thing is getting them comfortable with the concept of numbers and maybe doing some simple addition and subtraction, and making sure that they know how to read and that they feel fluent with reading. So you might not do as many hours as I'm doing. Number 2, day 2. So you'll read the same book, Harold and the Purple Crayon, except that today is going to be language arts days. So maybe you read the book more slowly and ask your child to read along any words that they recognize. If there were words that when you read the book the day before, they didn't know the definition and you told them the definition, maybe see if they remember the definition today. Point out sight words that show up a lot, like the, he, that sort of thing. Perhaps ask them to spell some of these words. And then you could say to your child, hey, let's create our own crayon adventure picture book. Or maybe ask the kid, hey, what do you think Harold's gonna do tomorrow with his purple crayon? And let them dream up a story. And if they have the motor skills, maybe have them write a little bit of the story or draw a little bit of the story. And that's day 2. It's Tuesday, let's call it. Day 3, social studies. Read Harold and the Purple Crayon again. I know you're getting tired of it at this point, but the fact is your kid's not. Kids learn through repetition. And just as I said earlier, humans do too, adult humans do too, right? We need to hear things multiple times for them to sink in. And maybe there's something in the book that your kid wants to recreate in the world that you can consider social studies, right? For instance, pies are a big part of the book. You could bake pies. That's absolutely, anything to do with culture, food is culture, is social studies. You could also maybe talk about ships because there's a little ship. You could watch videos on shipbuilding. You could build a ship out of a cardboard box, something like that. Day 4, Thursday, read the book again. This is why it's called 5 in a row. And let's say it's science day. Pull out something sciencey and research it. During Harold's journey with the purple crayon, he encounters the moon. Maybe you watch some videos on YouTube on phases of the moon or some of the other resources that I mentioned in my blog post where there will be videos about phases of the moon. We could also do a fun science/art experiment